The wars with Carthage are called the Punic Wars, again, because, as we said in a previous screencast, because of the Latin word for Phoenician was Punic, and the Punic Wars were a series of wars that the Romans fought with Carthage for control of the Western Mediterranean and also the control of North Africa. Here we can see, here's the Italian peninsula, here's the city of Rome. This map is in your text. And here's Carthage. So they're really neighbors right across the Mediterranean here. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BCE, Rome conquered the island of Sicily. And this was under Carthage, the control of Carthage, before Rome's conquest of it. Rome later took Sardinia and Corsica, which were also part of Carthage because they felt so emboldened by the seizure of Sicily. So Rome begins to expand its territory to take over these three islands. The Second Punic War, which is perhaps has some of the most vivid stories in all of history, come from the Second Punic War, 218 to 201 BCE. This was fought again with Carthage, and this is where the story of Hannibal in the Alps comes from. Hannibal was the leader of Carthage, the military leader of Carthage, who brought elephants from North Africa. It was part of his military apparatus. He rode elephants and managed to march elephants across the Alps, which is just an amazing military feat, across the Mediterranean, across the Alps, down into the Italian peninsula. During the second Punic War, Hannibal got as far into Rome as deep within the Italian peninsula. It's very, very scary for Rome. One of the things that Carthage was counting on would be that the conquered peoples in the Italian peninsula, who would become the allies of Rome, we could put allies in air quotes there, would desert Rome to turn against them. But it turns out that that did not happen. So something that Hannibal was banking on, the conquered peoples of the Italian peninsula turning on Rome in order to gain their own liberty, did not happen. They stayed allied with Rome. Macedonia at this time, this is after the time of Alexander, but it's still certainly a force to be reckoned with here in the Eastern Mediterranean, fights on the side of Carthage. This pulls Rome into conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean, and is one of the first times that Rome sort of stretches itself into the Eastern Mediterranean, turns its military focus towards the east. It gets into conflict with the Greeks and the Macedonians in the Eastern Mediterranean. Eventually, in the Second Punic War, Rome has to invade Carthage, and at the Battle of Zuma, defeats Carthage, extorts huge monetary payments from Carthage, and in the process, Carthage has to hand over all this territory in Spain, all the territory that they controlled in Spain. So now, the end of the Second Punic War sees Rome expanding itself all the way here to the west, and all the way gets it all the way into contact with Macedonians in the east. Rome now extends from Spain to North Africa from Spain to Macedonia. The Third Punic War is where Rome is able to set up a province in North Africa. Eventually, the Third Punic War, 149 to 146 BCE, more than 50 years later, Rome destroys Carthage. Rome, after defeating Carthage, decides that what needs to happen is that Carthage needs to be destroyed and turned into a province. And this is an example of somewhat of a change not a dramatic change, but somewhat of a change in Roman tactics dealing with conquered adversaries. Complete and utter domination of the people they conquered was how Rome decided to deal with conquest. After defeating Macedonia in the Second Punic War, in the Third Punic War too, the Roman commander showed respect for the Greeks, for proclaiming the freedom of the Greeks, and put a quote of the freedom of the Greeks. Macedonia believed it was an alliance that was being formed with Rome, but Rome was seeing Macedonia as a client state. This misunderstanding leads the Senate to order Corinth, Corinth is right here, part of Macedonia, to be destroyed. Again, consistent with this attitude of simply leveling those that stand in the way of Roman conquest. I've added here, this is somewhat reminiscent of the Persian Wars. If you think back to the outbreak of the Persian Wars, where Athens believed it was in an alliance with Persia rather than in a situation of being a client of Persia. This is a pattern that repeated itself with Macedonia. And then finally, in 133 BCE, a Hellenistic king, which is another way of saying a Greek in culture king in Asia Minor, decides to, when he dies, leaves a large swath of Asia Minor to Rome. So by 133 BCE, we see that as a result of the 3 Punic Wars, war with Macedonia, and inheritance of a huge chunk of Asia Minor, Rome now expands and extends to Spain, North Africa, all of the Italian peninsula. They control islands in the Mediterranean. They control what used to be Greece, now Macedonia, and Asia Minor.